What's up, guys? Welcome back or welcome to our podcast called Behind the Mask. I'm Chris.
And I'm Becca.
And today we are welcoming back our good friend Jordan to talk about a really, really important episode. And Becca is running the show today. So, Jordan, will let you introduce yourself to the people again. And then, Bex, I'll throw it to you.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited to be here to talk about this. I am a senior at Loyola, Maryland. I'm running cross country and track, transitioning to graduating. So all very exciting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan, thanks again for being with us. And the conversation that's going to be guiding this episode came when we sent out what do you call it on Instagram? A poll?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, a poll on our Instagram story, and Jordan commented, what is something that you will have to unlearn or are in the process of unlearning after graduation from sport? And Jordan put, life being hard does not equal productivity. And my mouth dropped open when I read that, because on so many levels I can identify with that. But Jordan, to open us up, can you just kind of break that down for us? Where did that come from? When did this truth bomb moment hit you? Just kind of take us through, give us an introduction of this topic.
Yeah, so I think that part of it was kind of recognizing some patterns in my life, and like, why do people stay in toxic situations? Why do we work so hard in things that we know aren't healthy for us? Like, why do we kind of allow ourselves to get into these patterns that are clearly not good for us? And like, we're even still we're pushing ourselves and we're challenging ourselves to do these things. Like, why do we do that? And so I was kind of just trying to figure that out in my own life, like why I was working so hard and making things so hard for myself that didn't need to be that hard. And I kind of came to this light bulb moment of that's what we do in sports. Like, our entire lives, athletes who excel often have a dysfunctional relationship with pain, honestly. And the best athletes are the ones who are best able to push through painful situations and who are able to kind of push themselves past those limits. And so I think that it was just and then the more that I talk to people about this, it was no, I do that too. I am always trying to see where I can challenge myself and where I can kind of go beyond this natural stopping point. And that was carrying over into every single area of my life. And I just think it was this interesting realization that I don't always have to be in pain. We don't always have to be doing painful things. It's I don't know why that's so earth-shattering to us, but so that's kind of where that all came from.
Yeah, so good. And so I don't always have to be in pain or struggling or pushing, running on an empty tank.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is it's so ingrained in sports culture, and it's really glamorized in sports culture, which is a question I wanted to ask you as a follow-up. But before we go there, Chris, what are some of your thoughts on this topic? I know you have some.
Yeah, I laugh because I live in a perpetual state of pain. If you're a retired athlete, you know what that feels like. But yeah, no, I think when you state it that way, it's really funny. We laugh about it, and it's this is a completely absurd way to live your life, and yet that's just athlete culture. And I think something that, when you brought this up too, that was kind of light bulb moment for me too, is operating on empty is just the norm in athlete culture. And when you try and take opportunities to kind of rejuvenate, you're almost being lazy or something like that. We don't really know what a rest day is. Even though it's a rest day, you're not resting. You're doing something still. So Yeah, no, it's interesting, like being able to live your life not in a perpetual state of pain, trying to actually thrive and not just survive. I think athlete culture, that's what it's about. It's about survival. Let's get to the next game. Let's get to the next training session. Let's make sure I don't lose my spot. All these things are like a fear of missing something, and we neglect what we need to do to refresh ourselves so we can operate in the fullness of how we can operate. So yeah, no, so I think it's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that, to both of your points, comes down to, okay, so it's ingrained in athlete culture, but why? Like where is it coming from? And I think one of the things I wanted to ask you, Jordan, was this idea of like glamorizing the grind. And how has that kind of, do you see that in athlete culture in your life as an athlete? Chris, I want to ask you the same question. And how has that mindset kind of triggered this and like ingrained this perpetual state of pain, as Chris so eloquently puts it?
Yeah, I mean it's all around us. Like if you look up to these people and like you like I think from a young age, like you see these role models and you see the way they answer interviews or the way they talk about like your training schedule or whatever the case may be. I think it's like they must have been the hardest worker. And like you hear like the sayings too. It's like hard work beats talent when talent, like whatever it is. But it's like our whole lives, like all you're told is that like you have to work hard. And I think that is like there is so much merit to that. Like that is very valuable. And like I appreciate like my ability to work hard. And that's something that I value and it takes us very far in life. But like there also is a balance that I think we forget. And like a lot of times we take the human outside of sports. Like we are what we produce and we are what we can do. And I think, you know, a lot of it, like whether it comes from ourselves of like the insecurity that we're not enough, or whether it comes from outside influence of like your coach is always going to, you know, push you one step harder, like wherever that external pressure is coming from, I think it reinforces this idea that like you can't ever stop. Like there's always someone working harder than you. And we take that over into everything.
Yeah, no, Jordan, I totally agree. And the thing about, we are what we produce. It's interesting because what do we call athletes? We're machines, right? They're like the most quote unquote productive athlete operates with almost no weakness. They're able to go, go, go. And what's like your go-to thing whenever people ask you about a character trait? I'm hardworking. That's the first thing every athlete says. And it's like, back to the point of productivity, I was decided to Google this because why not? And the whole thing of productivity is the ability to work efficiently, right, within that time in order to maximize output. So if productivity equals efficiency, athletes are really not very productive because we don't operate efficiently. We try and maximize it every single thing that we do and do every single thing at 100%. That is not efficient. We don't know how to be efficient. So what I think of in terms of glamorizing the grind, it's like what you said, hard work beats talent, talent doesn't work hard. No pain, no gain. Like throw all of the cliche athlete, probably from Friday Night Lights phrases out there. Like it always glamorizes that you have to do more, be more, all of these things. And I think that not enough gets spoken about what happens when I actually don't have anything else left. Well, your coach's response is, well, you need to work harder so that you don't end up on empty. I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Because if you think about it with the machine metaphor, something's going to be empty. You have to replenish it to some extent. And there's just not enough of a focus on that. Even if an athlete gets hurt, this is something that always used to be said when I was in high school. When people pull muscles in preseason, because we do 3 practices a day in 100-degree heat and nobody thinks we should drink water, coach's response is, you're not fit. And it's like, well, or we've just trained for 2 hours 3 times today and it's 100 degrees and you're not letting us drink water. So it's not like there's a link between productivity and hard work when really it's supposed to be linked with efficiency. But yeah.
Yeah, Chris, I think you bring up a really good point, and I think I do think we have it backwards. And I think also within athlete culture, again, it goes, a lot of times I tease this back and I come back to the reality of we're idol junkies and we're glory thieves, and we have this desire inside of us to praise something. So if we're not praising God, if you're not worshiping God, we're going to go look for something to worship. And so then put that in athlete culture, we worship hustle. We glorify hard work. We worship, we admire the people who are keeled over after, pushing their body to a limit that, again, there's such a fine line between what does it mean to work hard and then what does it mean to, I'm trying to look for a word, almost enslave yourself to work ethic and to hustle and to grind. But again, because I think it's so ingrained in athlete culture, it's like unspoken. We don't talk about it. We don't realize it, that it's even happening. So then it's just an endless cycle of worshiping something really unhealthy. And Chris, to your point of, if the definition of productivity is efficiency, then athletes really aren't very productive. And the reason we're not productive isn't because we need to work harder. I mean, sure, there's cases of that. But the reality of it is, if you come down to it, there needs to be a balance, and there needs to be a filling just as much as there is an emptying of your tank. And I think that's not something that's dealt out in the world today. And it's very hard. It's very hard to grab onto when we just want to be the best. So kind of to that point.
I was sorry, Bex, not to cut you off. I had a really, really quick point, kind of to the point you were just saying. I find it interesting when it comes to efficiency, if we talk about what actually makes successful athletes, in particular in America, it's access to resources, right? I feel like athletes, we make it seem like it's such a blue collar thing. It's really not. If you have more access to resources compared to somebody else, it doesn't mean you don't have to work as hard, but it probably means there are less little things you have to do that the next athlete who has all this access to coaching, all this access to training, all this access to weight training and nutrition and all of these things, you're working smarter and working harder. So it's interesting, even when it comes to transition to life after sport, we don't get taught how to utilize our resources. We get taught, do it yourself. But if you actually think about what makes you a successful athlete, it's resources. It's not necessarily you went out and you slaved on a track for 10 hours, but you don't have any access and you don't have the training that's going to make you a better athlete. I see it all the time with keepers that I coach. You can have all this raw athletic potential and go out and train every day with poor technique compared to the person who might not go out and train every day, but the 2 hours they spend 3 days a week is more valuable than the 10 hours you're spending every day of the week, because there's resources that this person doesn't have compared to the other. So that kind of plays in with the efficiency piece too, when we're trying to learn how to be adults outside of sport, is can I take advantage of my resources, or do I try and do everything myself? Small tangent, wanted to throw that in there.
Okay, we can cut this out, but dude, that's so true. I've never thought about that. And yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think about it in terms of soccer. Americans in particular, women's soccer. If you think about it, we're closing the gap in how much better we are than everywhere else in the world. We have more access to quality coaching than everybody else in the world. If they were the same, we wouldn't beat everybody as handedly as we do now. So it's not that like American women soccer players aren't working hard, but we also have more access to things that somebody in Italy doesn't have. So they have to work. They're working hard. They're just having to do some stuff that they probably wouldn't have to do if they had those resources. So
yeah, that's a really good point. So Jordan, coming back to you, here's this mindset, here's this culture. Now, as a believer, as someone who God dropped this truth bomb in your heart, what is the difference? What does the transition look like to a life of blank rather than glamorizing, hustle, and always having to be hard in order to be productive?
Yeah, I mean, I think a huge part of it is control in all of us. It's that we think that we can control the outcome, and that we think if we work harder, then the outcome will always work in our favor, which obviously isn't reality. Like, that doesn't ever happen. And this verse that kind of came to me like in all of this was Psalm 127:2, and it says, "In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves." And that was just like, I feel like summed it all up of like, if we're really trusting that like God is going to provide in our life and that he has good things for us and that his heart for us is to find rest and to find peace in him, then like doing the opposite all the time is just us convincing ourselves that we can control what's going on with our lives. And that by working so hard and making things so hard for ourselves that we're in control of those outcomes instead of looking for peace in Christ. And I think like a lot of it is learning like what rest means and what it really means to be productive, as we were saying, and just like what productivity in Christ really means. And like I think a lot of it, like just through this whole process, was even like figuring out what rest was. And like I know in the Bible, like they talk about rest as like preparing for what's next. And I think that a lot of times, like in our culture, in Western culture in general, but in athlete culture, like you rest because you're exhausted. You rest because you're dead, instead of resting and recovering so that you can prepare for what's next and prepare for the greatness that God has for you.
Yeah, it's so opposite of everything that we're taught in the world, for sure. Chris, what do you think? Thoughts on that?
that hit me like a ton of bricks. He grants rest or sleep to those he loves. That is so profound. Like, yeah, no, that's so profound. I think that you would think the thing that comes into my head, Jordan, as you say that, is the phrase "control what you can control." You know what's wild about that phrase? How little can we actually control? It's so small. We say that phrase thinking that there's so much we can control. There is not. So it's interesting, like even Jesus is an example in using the Sabbath and using, even when he would go from miracle to miracle, he would always spend time with God in the process. He's not just like, all right, grind season, I got to go here, I got to go here. I've got 3 years to perform all these miracles. Like, let's go, boom, 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 boom. That was not the case. It was, I've got to take time to rest. I got to take time to eat. We know Jesus was always moving from one meal to another. So, so yeah, when I think about, us glamorizing the grind, as it relates to us, like, God calls us to be living sacrifices. We walk around like we're literally the walking dead as athletes. We all know what off season feels like. We're like half a human at that point. And that's just not how it's designed to be. But where I think, the control factor for sure plays a role. And there's a fear factor, I think, too, of like, what happens if I don't work as hard, quote unquote, as the next person? My position gets taken. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for who I am as a person if that's linked to what I do? So, but that's just not, who God has called us to be. We know that God wants us to perform good works and to serve him well. But above all those things, he wants us to abide in him and actually be a part of his family and be a part of, like, be in his presence even more so before we can do good work. So it's opposite, I think. I feel like in athletics, it's work hard so you can rest, where God's like, rest in me so that you can do the work I've called you to do. So.
Yeah, the reason I put it right back to you, Chris, was because it hit me like a ton of bricks too. And I needed to get thoughts together because it's so real and I just so much identify with that. And I think, Chris, to your point of a living sacrifice and also the point of working hard, there's this standard of you can always work harder. You can always work harder. You can always do better. You can always. And again, there's a fine line. And I remember one time when I was younger, I witnessed this interaction between a coach and an athlete. Didn't know either one of them, but the athlete was like keeled over after sprints and suicides and like hours of work, I'm assuming. And he was done. And he was like, Coach, I don't think I could have worked harder that's the most I've worked ever. And I don't think I could have given anything more. And the coach said, oh, you can always give more. And I was like, that is so, again, I have no idea where the relationship or where the coach was coming from. But my point is, when we have that mindset of my best is never good enough, my hustle is never good enough, we are determined to like grind ourselves into the ground. And Chris, when you brought up, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, I got this picture in my mind of, presenting ourselves, our work, as if we're this vessel. So I picture this vessel before the Lord, and it's got dings in it and scratches and dents, and it's scuffed up and it's broken here, and there's a shard on the ground here. And we present it to God and we're like, here you go. Like, here's my sacrifice. And I picture him being like, what did you do to it? Like, he's like, well, I worked it to the bone. And I just think I think it's backwards. And it takes a lot of, it takes the shining presence of the Holy Spirit to illuminate those parts of our hearts and the things that have been ingrained in us, to say like, no, this is actually the way that I've called you to. Take my yoke upon you. Doesn't mean be lazy, but it's a whole different universe, I feel like, than what's embedded in athletics and the world in general. So to that point of just living opposite and pursuing to walk in a relation opposite, what are practical things? What are things that stand in the way? Jordan, I know you had another point too. So go ahead there too.
I was just going to say, like, it's bringing me back to this idea that like we're almost convincing ourselves that like we can work hard enough to be good enough for God, and like that we can do anything that makes us somehow live up to this standard that like we're never going to live up to. And so like I think it's like where like all these insecurities are like us realizing that we're falling short inevitably, and we're not allowing God into those places because we've then convinced ourselves that somehow we can get ourselves out of it. And like that's just so wrong. Like that's not where his heart is for us at all. Like his heart is for us to invite him in and make us whole, instead of us trying to make ourselves whole and then going to him.
Jordan, get after it with that point. Come on. That was so good. And that, yeah, throw the big T up. Let's go. That's so good. Jeez. Like convincing ourselves that we can work hard enough to be good enough for God. It's like, if you think about it, it's ingrained in us from athlete culture. From the time we're a kid, we are working hard to try and win approval for somebody. If your parents are coaching you, it's your parents. It's whoever your coach is, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you're an adult, it goes from there. And I always think about like when was the point where I was like, okay, this is not a true thing. I remember like it was yesterday because when I was at Vandy, we got a new coach and there were different parts of my game. He's like, you got to do this, you got to do this. And I'm working really, really hard to try and play the way he wants me to play. And I'm not playing the way I know how to play. And my performance took a giant dip for that, whatever that period of time was. And there was a realization because I came into the office and he was like, we're not starting you for this game because it feels like this isn't where it needs to be, et cetera, et cetera. And I left and was pissed, first of all, called my mom and was like screaming on the phone. I was really annoyed by it. But then I was like, you know what? I no longer care about whether or not he deems my performance good enough for him. This is about playing for me and playing for God, and that's it. And then once that realization took hold, there was a freedom in it. Played the rest of the season, went back to playing the way Chris knows how to play, and like actually had fun when I was playing too. And that really like affected my performance in a positive way. So I think about it to Jordan's point of like, we're trying to work so hard to meet an unattainable standard that realistically doesn't exist. If we're trying to meet perfection, we're setting ourselves up for failure. But I don't even think it's that. I think it's just some ideal version that we all make up for ourselves. And when it comes to glamorizing the grind, that's what it is. Everybody's like, I want to work as hard as, name your favorite athlete, LeBron, Serena Williams, all these people. But then we hear professional athlete after professional athlete talking about mental health, mindfulness training, opportunities when they get to sit and rest and embrace the stillness of moments. They're not talking about, oh, I just spent 3 hours in the weight room. They're talking about, oh, I just spent 3 minutes in a chair with my eyes closed in listening to nothing but silence and trying to figure out what my thoughts were. So like identifying and trying to figure out what our priorities are too when it comes to the efficiency and if we're working hard, are we actually getting closer to whatever we're trying to get to, or are we pulling ourselves farther because our priorities are all jacked up? But yeah, Jordan, what you said, really, it's really good. Just hit me like a ton of bricks. Love it.
And I think even on a practical level to that point, like, again, I'm using like one of my own experiences, but when we glamorize the grind, like nothing else seems to matter. Like our bodies can't function optimally if they're being driven into the ground 24/7, if they're not being nourished right, if they're not being rested, all of these things just from a biological level, like it doesn't work, but we think it does. And I just think I found it interesting. I was thinking about this the other day. I don't know if you guys have heard of these like Whoop bands that track your sleep and your recovery and all of these things between like workouts and all these things. And I was looking at like the data and seeing that my recovery for my next workout, my recovery between the two was not where it needed to be. So therefore I had to adjust the workout. And my initial response was like, no way, I'm just going to push through it. I can do like whatever. But the reality of it is like that wouldn't have been productive. In my mind, at first glance, it was productive because it's been ingrained that productivity is just something that hurts. And I feel better about myself because I just pushed myself to the limit. But what my body actually needed to grow and be healthier was not that. And I just think it's really interesting. This culture, this mindset isn't how God designed us to live on a spiritual, mental, emotional level, but it's also not how he designed us to live physically. You know, if we're mind, body, spirit, like it all goes hand in hand. And I just thought that was really an interesting realization to be like looking at this data and I'm like, oh shoot, that's that's not true. And the other point I wanted to make too is I think it's so embedded in culture, we don't even realize it. Like I think about times, when it's embedded in a huddle or something. And so many of my interactions with coaches or teammates, and when I share these struggles, they're like, oh my goodness, you know, where is this coming from? What are the roots? And I'm like, well, you said it out there, you know, and the reality of it is they're like, well, I said it because that's what we need for our sport. You know, that's not my heart for you. And it's so hard to understand because we just, to your point, Chris, of searching for approval, we're all playing this game. We're all playing sports, and sports, there's a winner and there's a loser. And I just think it gets dicey because we assume that how we're seen in people's eyes and how we perceive ourselves is through the lens of sports, when in reality, sport is just a thing that we all do, but it has been intertwined and become the lens through which we see so much of our world, which is, we could have a whole nother conversation on. But more on a practical level, realizing that this is there, what are practical steps to take to start, I want to say walking out of it, but it's such a struggle every day to walk out of it. What are practical steps to push against this mindset in this culture? Jordan, we'll start with you.
I think for me, like a few things that I think of like right off the bat is, well, like one, just like really evaluating your relationship with God. Like we've all been in those positions where like everything going on in our lives affected the way we performed. And like, I think a lot of times like we forget where God falls into that. Like we forget where God falls into our circumstances and like where he needs to be. Like in order to find rest from God, we have to know him and like we have to be near him. And so I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is like the fellowship that we allow into our lives. Like I know I was in a team meeting yesterday and just talking about like finding opportunity to give yourself the same grace that you give to others. Like that is so much easier said than done. And like I know I'm the person who like I will always give everyone advice that I clearly am not listening to myself. And just like learning how to be vulnerable with people and learning how to open up about these struggles. A lot of times like we're pushing through and we're not talking about things and we're dealing with this pain that's so under the surface, and then you fall short, and then people hold you to these expectations, not understanding where that pain is and where it's coming from. And I think that's a really big thing, and it's so easily forgotten. Like I think even just thinking about our faith, like we always think about like reading your Bible more or going to church or whatever the case may be, and those are like the practical steps, and then we forget the value of fellowship and how like it was never in God's heart for us to be alone. And like that is also rest, is allowing other people to carry some of those burdens for you.
Yeah, really good. I think to your point, definitely evaluating our relationship with God and who we're doing things for. I think also evaluating why we like to be busy. I know for me, to some extent, for some people, like there's some busyness factor. There's like a fear of man thing. Oh, I don't measure up. So-and-so has 17 things to do today. I need 18. Like there's some comparison. I think that there's definitely, for me, sometimes there's a pride issue. Like I'll say right now, I'm on spring break and we still had like a couple things going on this week, but I literally was doing nothing one day and my mom was like, you were just restless. I was like, yeah, because I'm used to having 17 things to juggle. And right now I've got 2 and I really, really want to have 17 things to juggle. And I think, on a really practical level, embracing those moments to recognize, okay, this is a time where you don't have 17 things to do. Are you going to go and seek out more stuff to do? Or are you going to seek after God and choose to rest in his presence, to Jordan's point? I think the other practical thing too with this is, and this has to do with workouts, and I'm actually really excited when Isaac pops on because he's going to talk about this, is like dispelling the myth that it needs to be painful to be productive. And this goes all the way back to the first point, Jordan, that you made. I think with workouts, what do our athletes always say? Oh, I didn't feel anything. Oh, that didn't hurt. Oh, well, I don't feel gassed. Even for something that's like activation, like I'll have my athletes do an activation thing before we're about to dive around for 45 minutes, and they'll say, oh, I didn't feel that. And it's like, that's not the point. And you're about to feel it because you're about to hit the ground for about 45 minutes. So you don't want to feel it right now. So, but like recognizing that we can be productive and make sure that we're doing the right things and not feel utterly exhausted after. So like a really practical step is, this is me being very type A personality, but it helps me to not run myself into the ground. Make a to-do list and say, I need to make sure that I do XYZ today, but make it reasonable where it's not like, okay, I'm doing all these things and at the end of the day, I'm going to be exhausted. Maybe if you are used to setting the list at 10 things, set the list at 5. And in those 5 minutes, those last 5 things where you normally would do something and it takes you to exhaustion, find something else instead. That's something I always have to do. I need to not front load my list or I will literally stress myself out until I do all of it. So, but yeah, no, so I think those are 2 like practical stuff, making sure we're identifying or reevaluating why do we like to be busy? What is it doing for us? What purpose is it serving? And then take some stuff off the list. You don't have to be in pain. It's okay. You got tomorrow. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's such good stuff and real stuff. Like, I feel like that's like, we all have 27,000 things on our to-do list. And in reality, like, how many of those things have to be done? And how much work are we creating for ourselves? And I think you bring up a good point, Chris, of, I know for me, a lot of it comes down to a fear of man. If I say no to this person, if I do, like, they're going to look at me and they're going to see that I'm not working myself into the ground and think I'm not a hard worker or, whatever it may be. Yeah. And I think, Jordan, to your point of evaluating just where you are with the Lord, why am I doing what I'm doing? How do I see myself before God? What is my view of God? I think for me, one of the things that he and I are on a journey with is kind of deconstructing the idea that God is up there kind of like a coach or a spectator or someone who's like, I really hope you can pull this off. I gave you everything you need. Now let's go level up and get it done. Like, and when I slow down and I'm like, it's how I see God. And I remember I had a conversation with Heidi and she's like, no, absolutely not. And I know it in my mind and it obviously, but in my heart, it's so, for whatever reason, it's just ingrained in there. So I think really being open and honest and having conversations with other believers, and open conversations with the Lord and asking him for clarity, because he so wants that freedom for us. And the cross has bought that freedom for us. And it's it's an ongoing process of walking in it. So such good stuff, guys. We are coming up to our time limit, but those were kind of closing thoughts, but any other closing thoughts that you guys have pertaining to this topic?
Sorry, I had a weird timer going off on my laptop and I was trying to figure out what it was. Okay, I found it. Anyway, the last thing I'll say to this point or to this whole conversation echoes the point you just made, Bex, which is, do we trust God enough to fill in the gap that we leave? I think one of my, you guys both know Casey at this point, but we talked about this in If Gathering last week, 2 weeks ago. I don't even know at this point. But talking about how I feel often days where I only have 50% to give today. And I need to be okay with the 50%. And they met me and was like, yeah, be okay with the fact that you can only give 50, but then trust God to bring the other 50. So I think, yeah, like to this point of productivity, it doesn't have to be I give 100% or bust. It can be maybe I only have 25 today, but God is so willing and able and sovereign that he can bring more than the 75%. And he's gracious enough where he'll do that. So I think that too, like, can we trust God? And it again brings to Jordan's point of reevaluating where we are with him enough to say, okay, am I willing to trust him and let go of my control here?
Yeah. And I think just like realizing that like God desires good things for us. Like he has plans that are good for us. And I think a lot of times we put ourselves in situations and in relationships and in environments where we're allowing ourselves to get hurt, and that's not his heart. And I think, you know, the measure of a good friendship is not how hard it is and how toxic it is, or the measure of a good job is not if I am killing myself every day, you know, to measure up to someone else's standards. And I think it's just like seeing if what we're doing aligns with God's heart for our lives, and, you know, knowing what his heart is, knowing what his promises are, and not putting ourselves in situations that are the opposite of that, I think is, you know, that kind of encompasses it all for me.
Yeah, such good stuff. Well, mic drop on there. But Jordan, thank you so much for coming and having this conversation. I think it's one that is so many people that listen to this are going to be like, oh yeah, me too. But we don't even realize it until you don't know the weight of it until you put some light on it. So thank you for speaking this stuff out. Thank you for joining us and having the conversation. We will call it a wrap on this one. So thanks for joining us, guys, on podcast or Instagram or wherever you are. If you like what you hear, go ahead and hit the subscribe button at the bottom. Remember, our DMs are always open. Stay in touch, and we'll see you next time.